We're sitting 3 days before Tisha B'Av. I think what's uppermost in people's minds is the passage of another year where the temple is still destroyed, which might be repaired before Shabbos. And the Mashiach has not come. And we know that this is because of our own failure, that these events are in our hands. And if we would live up to the responsibilities that the Torah puts upon us, then this golus, this exile would be over, Mashiach would come. I think confronting failure is tricky. It's tricky. The attitude or attitudes that you should have towards it, so that they are realistic in religious terms, and if they'll be realistic in religious terms, they will reflect a true Torah perspective on failure, then they will be beneficial in psychological terms as well. And the theme, I think, is to recognize that failure is normal. Failure is the opposite of perfection. Failure is normal. I mean by normal, not just widespread, common, and frequent. I mean that it's an expected part of a Torah life. Now, those of you who know me know that I try to choose my words very carefully. I said it's normal and expected. I didn't say it was inevitable, but it's normal and expected. And there's a big difference between failures which are expected, which cause damage and have to be repaired, versus failures that are not expected, and which then, if you can't explain them, become much more dangerous, much more threatening. If you have a computer system, and from time to time you get a hardware glitch, welcome to the club. That happens to computer systems. But if one day you walk in and find that the entire computer system has been melted down to a pool of the aluminum on the floor, that's a different story. That's something you have to worry about, because who knows what else will melt down. Maybe it'll be the roof next. Now there's a Maharal. I don't fully understand the Maharal. There's certain aspects to it I don't understand, but it's a good starting point. And there's a teshuva on what the Maharal discusses, which I think will give us more perspective. And then we'll start talking about some historical examples. In the creation story, the Creator tells the earth to bring forth eitz pri osa pri, which literally means fruit trees bearing fruit. And of course, you read that and you have any taste for logic and precision, you say, fruit trees bearing fruit? Uh-huh. So the tradition comments, it means that the bark should have tasted like the fruit. That's what it means, fruit tree. And bearing fruit means bearing fruit. Should have been all fruit. But if you look at when the text describes what actually happened, it says the earth brought forth eitz osa pri, trees bearing fruit. It doesn't say eitz pri osa pri. From which the tradition already comments that the earth did not do what it was told to do. Now, Maharal says, don't make a mistake. The earth is not a conscious, responsible agent. The earth isn't guilty. The earth is not going to be punished. Leave that aside. But what is the message? And he says, the message is that Oretz, earth, cannot completely fulfill a command that's coming from heaven. The disparity between heaven and earth is too great for earth to actually fulfill that command. And he quotes a famous verse, Ein Adam Sadik Ba'aret Sheyasa Tov Lo Yechta. And yes, the word Adam is there, even though it's very rarely quoted, but that's the way the verse reads. There is no person righteous in the earth who will do good and not fail. Now, he says, that verse is full of what we call diukim. There's at least a dozen comments to make about it. But the Maharal asks, why does it say there is no person righteous in the earth? Where else did you think he was going to be? Floating in space? On Mars? Of course, righteous people, like all people, are in the earth, not anyplace else. So Maharal says, the verse here is telling you why they fail. They fail because a human being is partly earth. Says that the Kodesh Baruch Hu made Adam's body by gathering up earth, putting it together as a body. That earthliness or earthiness in man is what's responsible for failure. That's what the Maharal says. Problem with this statement, as I just reported it, is that it makes it sound like it's inevitable. It's impossible to comply perfectly with a command from the heavens. And then, if it's really impossible, it's very hard to understand why a failure would be something you're liable for, that you should be punished for. If you hadn't any control for that minimal failure, then you shouldn't be responsible for it. You shouldn't have to do teshuva for it. You wouldn't be guilty about it. But leave that aside. What the Maharal is telling us is that failure is built in. It's built into the way you're created. Now, there is a Tosfos who, as best I can read the words of the Maharal, Tosfos disagrees with the Maharal, but he uses the same image. And I think maybe that would give us a perspective that would be easier to understand in logical and in moral terms. The Gemara has a statement that there's no death without failure. Death is a result of some kind of failure. A person dies because of his own failure. The Gemara challenges that idea by saying, we have on record 4 people in the history of Judaism who died because of the strategy of the snake, meaning that the snake convinced Chava to eat from the tree of knowledge, and she gave to Adam to eat from the tree of knowledge, and through that, death came into the world. When they were created, they were not created to die. They were created to live forever, but they were warned, if you eat from the tree, you're going to die. And that's where death came from. And now, the Talmud is testifying, there are 4 people who died because of the strategy of the snake that caused the failure of Adam and Chava, but not through their own record. Not because of what they did. So how can you tell me, a misa below avon, there's no death without crime, without sin? Here are 4 people who the record, the tradition tells us, died without any failure, without any sin. So, and the Gemara takes it as if those 4 are a counterproof, and that the statement in the Talmud is false. It was a mistake. Because here are examples of people who died without having any failure. Tosfos says, what is the Gemara talking about? The Gemara is talking about 4 people we have on record who died without failure. We have this verse, which I just mentioned 3.5 minutes ago. Ein Adam Sadik Ba'aret Sheyasa Tov Lo Yechta. There's no person righteous in the earth who will do good and not fail. Everyone has failures. So why isn't the statement in the Talmud correct? And how can you credit the challenge of the 4 who died only through the strategy of the snake? According to that verse, there can't be any such thing. Everyone dies because of his own failures. So Tosfos says, the verse doesn't have to be universally true. It means almost always, the vast, vast majority of the time. But the verse tolerates exceptions. And this is a general rule about both biblical literature and the oral tradition, that general statements tolerate exceptions. And don't make the silly academic mistake of thinking, so they're sloppy, so they weren't thinking clearly, so they're not careful with their logic. What you're learning is how a culture expresses itself through its literature. And this culture expresses itself through its literature by writing general statements which are, for the most part, true. Not every last case has to be correct. Has to be accurate, has to be conformed to the general statement. So then it will come out, adapting the Maharal's insight to this context, it will come out that it's very difficult to have a perfect record. The artzius, the materiality, the physicality that is built into every person is an extremely difficult obstacle to overcome consistently. Yes. It's conceivable. 4 people actually did it. For the aficionados are ignoring the Pnei Yeshua, the Maharsha. They take the other position like the Maharal. I'm aware of that, and that would have to be answered separately. So they're dealing with Tosfos now. That there are exceptions, but the vast majority. So it means it's not programmed in, not absolutely necessary, not caused that you must fail. These 4 didn't fail, but it's very, very difficult. So that failure is going to be the overwhelming majority of the experience of the humankind. That there will be failures. I don't say that the majority of the actions will be failures, but almost every record will have in it failures. There'll be failures. So the idea of failure is built into the framework. And therefore, when a failure takes place, a person shouldn't feel that the game is up, it's over, or it wasn't meant to be, or the programming belies the purposes of. No, failure is a given that's going to be almost impossible to consistently avoid. Now, having said that, I have to point out that it's still possible to repair the failure. It's one thing to live life without having ever failed. It's another thing to leave the world clean with no responsibility for any failure. Teshuva enables a person to leave the world clean. And again, I'm choosing my words carefully. Teshuva by itself doesn't repair every failure. In fact, the failures are divided into 4 categories, which is a Mishnah in Yuma, and the Rambam copies it. And it works like this. If a person's failure is simply to omit performing a positive commandment, like he doesn't put on tefillin, or he didn't bench after a meal, or he didn't give tzedakah, charity, if his failure is omitting the performance of a positive commandment, when he does teshuva, it's over. It's erased, it's taken care of, it's repaired, nothing left to do. If his failure is a violation of a simple negative commandment, no cheeseburgers, no performance of physically creative acts on holidays, which is only a lav, it's not like Shabbos where it's Mrs. Besdin. Then it takes teshuva and Yom Kippur. But once Yom Kippur has been lived through and performed, it's over. If the negative commandment carries a strict penalty, like Misi B'dei Shemayim or Chorus or Mrs. Besdin, something that threatens a person's life, then it requires teshuva and Yom Kippur and suffering. And if the transgression involved that it's disgracing God's name in public, Echel Hashem, then it takes teshuva, Yom Kippur, suffering, and death. But with death, it's over. If he does teshuva, it's over. And he leaves the world clean. So you have to distinguish between having had a perfect record, that's what the Maharal says is impossible, and that's what Tosfos says is almost impossible, versus leaving the world with a perfect record, which would include repairing the mistakes along the way, and that's certainly possible. And that's something which many people have achieved, to the extent that the Gemara says if you see certain types of people perform a transgression, you're guaranteed by tomorrow morning he did teshuva. These people don't leave it over. They don't ignore it. Which would mean that on the vast majority of cases, these people will leave the world clean. So now, I'll give you some practical examples where we all have to take this attitude. It's just that we don't carry the attitude over to, let's say, religious performance. Let's say you're learning a new language, which will take you 2 or 3 years. Do you expect along the way, when you write or speak sentences in that language, that you'll never make a mistake? I don't think you expect that. Why would you expect that? You'll make mistakes, and you learn from your mistakes, and you gradually get better and be more consistent. You're learning a new course of mathematics. Do you expect to get 100 on every exam? Surely not. You'll make mistakes. The mathematical techniques are difficult, complicated, sometimes they're subtle. You'll make mistakes. But you allow it to yourself because it's normal. And you know that by the process of learning the material and practicing with the material, you get better and better at it. There is such a principle with respect to understanding the Torah also. Ein adam omed b'divrei Torah ad shenichshal b'hem. A person doesn't stand. He's not in control of the Torah that he learns unless he's tripped up by it, unless he makes a mistake in it. Now, I don't think this means page by page, subject by subject, but in general, part of the process of Torah learning is making mistakes and learning from your mistakes. A person who thought that if I make a mistake in my Torah learning, then I'm a failure and I'm desecrating God's name and I shouldn't be learning Torah, he's been trapped by the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, into a position of suicide. I can tell you personally, I spent a year in Merkaz Rav Kook, and I made a siyum, my first serious learning. I made a siyum of Masechta Rosh Hashanah, and there was a certain piece of that Masechta that I learned, and I loved it. It was complex, and had tricks and ins and outs. And for 5 years, anybody I could get to sit down and listen to me, I would teach him that piece of the Gemara. 5 years later, I found out that I didn't understand it correctly. After teaching it consistently for 5 years, I found out I had to be saying yeshiva, wrong pshat. If that had devastated me, if that had pushed me into a depression, I wouldn't be sitting here today. You have to take failure as a normal part of life. Again, not because it's inevitable, not because there's no responsibility, not because nothing has to be fixed. Yes, I could have been more careful. What I could have done is taken my understanding of the Gemara and gone to someone more experienced than myself and say, listen, here's how I understand this Gemara. Did I get it right or not? That would have been the humble and smart thing to do. I didn't do it. I could have saved myself and a lot of other people the time of studying something that was wrong. So, but this kind of failure is normal. And when you think of the greats of Jewish history, you could see that it applies in almost every case. I didn't mention this before, but the Gemara says there were 4 people who, according to the plain pshat in the Gemara, again, I'm ignoring the plain Yeshua and the Maharal. And plain pshat in the Gemara is they made no mistakes. These 4 are not in the top 10 of greats Jewish history. One is Benjamin, the youngest of Jacob's children. This is not Yehuda, from whom the kings come. This is not Levi, from whom the priestly class comes from. This is not Yosef, who saved them in Egypt, and so and from whom one of the messiahs will come, Mashiach ben Yosef. Of the 12, in a certain sense, Benjamin is he's the youngest, and he's, so to speak, a minor player. One is Amram, Moses' father, not Moses, not Aaron, not Miriam. One is Yishai, David's father, and one is one of David's sons, from someone named Gottleib. These are the people who managed to get through life without failure. Well, gee, that means Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Yehuda and Levi and Yosef, not to mention the others, and Dovid and Shlomo and Yoshua and the Gottleib in the Gemara, in the Chumash, and Pinchas and Elazar and Isamar and Nachshon ben Aminadav, who jumped into the Yam to split the Yam. All of them had failures. That's really quite a consistent record. Yeah.
There was a difference from having failures and being perfect, not having failures and being perfect.
Okay, I accept the suggestion. I use the word perfect as if it was synonymous with not having failures. Let me retract that. Maybe perfect is stronger than that. And let me just talk about having a record with no failures. That's what the Gemara there is talking about. It says that death requires failure, and these four didn't have failures, so according to that they shouldn't die, and that's why death requires failures refuted. It's not true. And the verse that we were discussing talks about failure specifically. The word perfection doesn't appear there, so I accept the suggestion. I retract the word perfect.
I don't think that I've said it. I was just thinking maybe it is.
Okay, I think you're right. I shouldn't have said perfect. In particular, perfect, to violate perfection would include not doing the right thing as well as you could have done it. That's not a failure. Not the kind of failure I'm talking about. It's not a transgression. No Torah law has been violated. But the person isn't perfect because he didn't give it the maximum effort that he could have. So that's a different getter. Their perfection will part company from failure. So I take back.
Very subtle difference.
Yeah, but I take it back. I don't think I should use the word. Yeah.
Question: the failures you're talking about only like transgressions or sins, or also they also like failure through your maximum productivity, or like a failure like in a test?
Failure what? Say again.
Like, are they only like kind of moral or failures or sins or like transgressions, or are there also like failures? And let's say you're trying to run a certain amount and you failed it, like.
You're trying to run a certain amount of.
Let's say you were like competing for something and you failed. Like, is that a failure also?
No, I'm not talking about.
Like a math test.
I'm talking about moral failures.
Only moral.
Moral and spiritual failures, right? The others, there's a different. Here, the failure is a value term.
Yeah.
There, it's an objective term. You might be better off when you fail in that sense. Here, you can't be better off by failing. Yeah.
We know you choose very carefully your words, and I don't know if I know this correctly, but I didn't hear neither Moshe or Aaron. I mean,
I didn't get to them. I was interrupted. Yes, Moshe and Aaron and Miriam,
yes, right.
They all committed failures, and the failures are recorded in the text, let alone the oral tradition. They're all committed failures. David, King, and Solomon. Every one of them is recorded as having failed, and some of them multiple times. And some of them paid terrible prices. And Moses was kept out of the land of Israel. He prayed to go in for 515 times, and God said to him, "No, because you failed." No, because it's a long story, but you did fail at the waters, and I'm telling you, you can't go in. So they all committed failures. So the idea of failure is normal, and it's something which you have to take as part of the Miscarrot in Hebrew, part of the framework of life that we're put into, and that's why there is a mechanism for repairing the failures. So now, and then we're talking about, so in Jewish history, you also have failures. Even cases, my Rabbi Zatzal pointed this out, even cases where what you think what happened as a success, there's usually some kind of pagam, some kind of blemish on it. That's not a perfect success. So, and then sometimes there's a sequence where the first failure leads to the later failures. One such sequence, which he taught us, I don't know if it's anywhere earlier than, but he taught us, when we left Egypt on the night of Pesach, the Torah is very explicit. It says people were in no hurry to leave. Okay, Egyptian power was broken, the will to keep them there was broken, but they were in no hurry to leave. And they were pushed out by the Egyptians. Ki gorshu miMitzrayim, v'lo yochlu lismamea. They were expelled from Egypt. They couldn't delay. They were delaying. Excuse me, I'm preparing for tomorrow night's supper, and I'm baking myself some challahs, because there's no reason why you shouldn't have challahs and eat them 24 hours later. Wrap them in saran wrap, and and they'll be fresh when we get there. And they didn't. That's why they didn't have food to take out with them, because Egyptians pushed them out. So the Rabbi Zatzal said, so you see that the Exodus wasn't our action on our own. No, the Egyptians had a hand in the Exodus, which means it wasn't we didn't own it completely. Well, that led to the golden calf, and that led to the sin of the spies and other rebellions. Each one, it led, by the way, Nasa v'nishma, which I used to portray as an absolute victory. God offered us the Torah, we said we'll do it, we'll understand it, we'll hear it. 2 days before the actual receipt of the Torah. But Chazal say that they didn't really mean it. They apply a verse from Psalms. With their lips they lied to him, but their hearts weren't with him. And Chazal say, here you have the right words, but the wrong heart. In the case of Purim, where they bowed down to the statue, there you had the wrong action with the right heart. They didn't believe in it. They weren't worshiping an idol, but they shouldn't have bowed down. And what we really need to do is take their heart and graft it onto the action of Nasa v'nishma, and then you'll have a complete performance with heart and action. But that's portraying it as a failure. One of my chavusas pointed it out to me. So the existence of failure is natural. Now we have an expression in the Gemara which refers to this. It's called Yirida l'tzorech aliyah. It doesn't refer only to this, but Yirida l'tzorech aliyah means a descent for the sake of an ascent, going down for the sake of going up. If you've ever climbed a big mountain, often there are foothills leading up to the mountain. So your progress is, you climb to the top of the first foothill, and then you go down into a shallow valley, and then you climb to the top of the next foothill, and then you go down into a shallow valley, and then you go up. So there's descent for the sake of the next ascent. And that's normal. There's a certain type of climbing that you're capable of doing after you go down.
Wow.
And that is what we're talking about when we say that failure is normal. Again, I'm not saying it's inevitable, and I'm not saying you're not responsible. You're responsible, and it's a failure, but it's a failure whose productivity in the system is built in. So a person should feel, yes, I could have done better, yes, I should have done better, but I'm still on track. I'm still on track. That's the feeling that one has to have. I think the same is true with national failures. Kodesh Baruch Hu set up the world in such a way that it will succeed. Kodesh Baruch Hu does not fail at the projects that he undertakes, even though very often the means that he has at his disposal are unknown, but it will succeed. And the failures and the descents are part of the normal progress. There's a very arresting image in the Gemara. You know that the Aron Kodesh, the Holy Ark that had the tablets in it, had a golden cover called the Kaporos, and the gold of the Kaporos was fashioned into the images of two angels, one at either end of the. It was a rectangular right-angled figure, and at each end was standing an angel with wings outstretched so that the wings touched in the middle and they covered over the kaparos. That's how it looked. But it's recorded that the positions of the angels were not fixed. And at different times when they were observed in different poses. Sometimes back to back instead of face to face.
That's so weird.
And when the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem, and they went into the temple and made sport for some days before they set it on fire, they saw the two angels embracing one another. Two angels embracing one another. Now, what would that mean? This is in the midst of a gigantic Jewish failure. And the temple is going to be burnt to the ground, and the people are going to be sent into exile. Why would the two angels be embracing one another? And the answer is this: it's like a hug goodbye. When you love someone and you have to be separated from someone, the last thing you do is you give a hug by which you say, I still love you. Even if we're going to be separated, I still love you. This is a very, very poignant image. Kadosh Baruch Hu was saying, we're going to be separated. Yes, the Shekhinah went with us into Gullus, that's true. There's no question that he was with us in the exile, but not the same. Because part of the Shekhinah stayed in the temple forever, never left the temple. Lo zaza Shekhinah mimekoma. So the relationship, when we go into exile, is a very different relationship. You know of Jacob seeing the ladder with the angels going up and down. And the commentators ask, why is up first and down second? If the home base of the angels is in heaven, it should be down and up. And the answer is that that night was the last night he was going to be in the land of Israel. The next day he's crossing over the border and exiting the land of Israel. And what he's seeing in the vision is the angels who accompanied him inside the land of Israel are leaving him. And the angels who will accompany him outside the land of Israel are coming to replace them. So there's a double message. Number one, although you're stepping over the border, you're not disconnected. But number two, you're not connected in the same way. Connected outside the land of Israel is very different from the connection inside the land of Israel. I happen to be learning with one of my chavusas, Shira Shirim with the Malbim and the Gra, and the Gra emphasizes, which is written in other places as well, that people, Jews who live outside the land of Israel, get their energy, their divine energy from which they live and exist and perform through the ministering angel of that non-Jewish nation, because they're living under his control. They don't have the direct, unmediated contact that we have in the land of Israel. And it makes a big difference, because, says the Gaon, when you have mitzvahs, we say, that the main reward for the mitzvah that you do is waiting for you in the world to come, but there's a kind of profit or interest that accrues that's above and beyond the main value, and that you can eat in this world. You can have that part of the payment in this world, but only in Israel. Outside the land of Israel, that can't happen. The ministering angel of the Americans or the South Africans or the British doesn't allow that. Doesn't allow that penetration, that transmission. So it's a big loss. So the consequences of failure are real, genuine consequences. And yet we have to look at it as Yuridu L'Tzorech Aliyah. It has to be the one of the conditions that is used for the ultimate perfection. Now, don't say that it's necessary, that because there's no end to what God could do. No should put limits on what God can do. But it's going to be used that way. This descent will be used as a stepping stone for the next ascent. Could we have done without it? Maybe we could have done without it, but that's the way it's going to be used. So when we look at the failure that we're dealing with now, the failure that led to the destruction of the Second Temple, which is what we're missing now, and the fact that we haven't succeeded in overcoming that failure, which would have caused it to be rebuilt, that's something which we have to look at with a dual feeling of distress and guilt and loss, but not having stepped off the pathway, not having stepped off the track, which will lead to the ultimate perfection. I'm stressing this in part because, and I don't know how realistic this is for people who are listening to this, but part of the Havdalah's Christianity is based on the claim that we have stepped out of the structure and we're no longer relevant. I think it's called successionism. We have a covenant with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. A covenant is a two-sided agreement. Usually, when you have a two-sided agreement, like a contract, if one party to the agreement violates it, then the other party is not responsible. Is not required to keep up his side of it because the agreement's been broken. That's normal, but it's not true in our case. The Gemara talks about our relationship to the patriarchs, and it talks about two different connections. One is called Schus Avos, and one is called Bris Avos. And the nature of them is different, and their power is different. Schus Avos, which you hear about much more often, the merit of the ancestors, works like this. Because of Schus Avos, we are judged more leniently when we fail. More leniently. Why is that? Odessa explains as follows. When a person performs a crime, and this, by the way, I think holds the secular justice as well, you measure the crime against his character. You measure the crime against his psychology. And you ask, does this express his essential character? Or is it something that happened for peripheral reasons, but his essential character isn't criminal, it isn't decayed? A judge often will use his prerogative to give different types of sentencing. He says, well, it's a first-time offense, and it's not in your family, it's not in your social circles, and we understand the psychology that led to it, and of course it was wrong, it has to be punished, but the punishment will be a lenient punishment because it's not a symptom of essential corruption. Whereas in another person's case, you'll see that it's rooted in his character, that given an opportunity he would do it again. He really has no remorse because it's who he is. So Schus Avos means that there's something of the patriarchs still in us, and when we perform a transgression, it's really superficial, and therefore we're treated more leniently. Now, here's the bitter news. Schus Avos can run out. It's not guaranteed. And many say that it has run out because we've attenuated the element in us that represents the patriarchs has become so attenuated, weakened, ethereal, superficial, that it no longer functions for us. So the Schus Avos can be used up. But there's something else called Bris Avos. Bris Avos is the covenant of the patriarchs and the later generations. Bris Avos is permanent. Because Baruch Hu makes the bris, the covenant from his side, permanent, no matter what we do. No matter what we do. That covenant is absolutely permanent. So when the Christians say, you violated the covenant, and God discarded you, and according to certain Catholic doctrine, they are the house of Israel, not we. We gave it up. They're the house of Israel. House of Israel means the elected, the chosen by God to represent him in the world. The truth is, this covenant, as many verses say, is absolutely permanent, and therefore, nothing we can do will step outside of that framework. It's not allowed. And indeed, one of the verses in Jeremiah apparently there were people who went into the Babylonian exile and who said, if God allowed his temple to be destroyed, he's finished with us. He's just discarded us. So the Novi says to them, Eze sefer krisus yeshim achem. When a man and woman get divorced, he hands her a document of severance. Krisus means severance, cutting off. When he hands it to her, then they're divorced. God says to the Jewish people in Babylonia, show me your sefer krisus. Show me your get. Where did I give you a get? Where did I ever say or imply anything about cutting off the relationship? Never happened. It never happened. Now here was a good opportunity for this to go wrong. You're in Babylonia, the temple is destroyed, no sacrifices, the laws that apply in the land of Israel don't apply. You're under the power of another nation, which is a gigantic chilul Hashem, a disgrace to God's name. But apparently some people said, then it's over. Then it's over. Here's where Bris Avos tells us that they are established. They're established, something that can't be broken. And by the way, I'm throwing this as a footnote because I just learned this a few days ago in the Daf Yomi. But this was really a surprise to me, and I've mentioned with other people that they're surprised also. You probably will remember that it says in Sefer Ezra that the people intermarried with non-Jews. And you think, 70 years? 2 generations already? They've lost their commitment to the extent they're ready to intermarry? That's like cultural suicide. It's giving up everything. Well, the Gemara brings the verse in Sefer Ezra, that on the way back, the leaders asked them for their Sefer Yichus, the document of their lineage, to check their lineage. And Rashi says, the verse is talking particularly about Kohanim. These Kohanim wanted to serve in the temple. He said, check their Sefer Yichus to see whether they are halalim. Now a halal is a Kohen who's the result of a marriage between a man who's a Kohen and a woman, a Jewish woman, to whom he's forbidden, like a divorcee. That child is a halal. Rashi says the problem is halalim. Gee, if a Jewish man marries a non-Jewish woman, the problem is not halalim. The problem is that the child is not Jewish. And Rashi says halalim, so the Chazon Ish, I have the Shas Lublin in the back, they bring these things, I'm not such a big scholar. In the back, the Chazon Ish picks up this Rashi, and he says, of course, when they married non-Jewish women, they converted them first. They didn't brutally commit intermarriage. Like King Solomon, who married all those foreign princesses. He converted them first. But a Kohen can't marry a convert, and the child will be a halal. And that's why Rashi says the only problem is halalim. It gives you an entirely different picture of the period of time. It's not the brutal desertion of a Jewish identity that it makes it sound like. Okay, there are other verses that talk about chasing away their non-Jewish wives. That probably was the ones in Israel, who were a tiny, tiny minority, scattered among non-Jews, and they intermarried. We're talking about the ones coming up from Babylon, in particular the Kohanim. There, Rashi says, was halalim. I saw that a few days ago, and I thought, wow, I've misunderstood that period of history, and I think a lot of other people also misunderstand that period of history. So, what we have to try to understand is that as the time wears on and we go through various periods of history and there are improvements and backslidings and all, none of it means that we're off track. None of it means that we're abandoned. None of it means that we aren't still going to make progress towards the ultimate end. And the last remark that I would like to make, there is a statement in the Talmud that the Mashiach will come in a generation that's either all good or all bad. Now, I think here what's very important is what Maimonides says, at the very end of the Mishnah Torah, last chapter. He says about the coming of the Messiah that no one knows how it's going to happen. Because, he says, all the verses that you have in the prophets that talk about it are vague, they're ambiguous, and some of them contradict other ones. And he says there's no oral tradition. So all we have is the verses. And the verses aren't clear. So no one knows how it's going to happen. Which means that if someone quotes to you a verse or even a statement in the Talmud, which is going to be based somehow on a verse, and say, well, it says in the Holy Book that this is the way it has to happen. No, that's not correct. It's not the way it has to happen. First of all, if you look at other pages in the Holy Book, you'll see it says something else. And we may be misinterpreting the verses from which the description came in the first place. No one knows how it's going to happen until it happens. So, a second. So now when we look at, so when the Talmud says it's either a generation that's all good or all bad, for example, Rav Aaron Kotler, in America, in the 50s, who founded Lakewood Yeshiva, which became the standard for yeshivas in the whole North America, and standard for a lot of the Yiddishkeit, he once asked his students in the 50s, in America, what are we closer to? Generation that's all good or all bad? And their response was, Rabbi, that's a no-brainer. I mean, they didn't really say that. They were afraid. But, obviously, with so many Jews who don't keep mitzvos, of course we're closer to a generation that's all bad. He said, no, that's not correct. Because those Jews who are not keeping mitzvos don't know any better. And therefore, their failure to keep mitzvos isn't guilty. They don't count. They're neutral. We who know, if we would be acting the way we need to act, we would be in a generation that's all good. So we have to take into consideration that we don't understand exactly how these statements work, and there are many different statements. One statement to keep in mind, this used to be hanging in the office in Ohr Somayach, is a quotation from the Chafetz Chaim, that what's needed to bring the Mashiach is a certain amount of merit, and it accumulates over time. It isn't that a generation's total quality has to be perfect. That would mean that this generation will be better than all the generations of the last 2,000 years. That's not in the cards. Nothing's impossible, but that's not in the cards. No, every generation makes a contribution, and it adds up like a bank account. And the last generation could be 98% failure, but the 2% success will be just the amount that's necessary to go over the top mark and to finish the deposit. So there's no reason for us to take a look around us and to see how Jews are living and how Jews are suffering and how Jews are rebelling and to say, well, it's hopeless. There's no way that something could happen in our time. No, the 13 fundamental principles of Jewish faith, Jewish belief, Jewish trust, include one about the Mashiach, the Messiah. And there it says, even though he delays coming, I will wait and anticipate him. It's the only one of the 13 principles that includes an attitude. All the other ones are commitment to a proposition. Here's an attitude, waiting and anticipating. And it says, I am waiting and anticipating every day that he shall come. Not, I'm waiting and anticipating that he shall come every day. There's a big difference. We know there are days in which he won't come. The Gemara says on Friday and Shabbos he won't come. I'm anticipating every day that he will come whenever he will come. I'm not anticipating that he'll come every day. That's not right. Every day goes on the anticipating, doesn't go on the come. But every day we should have the anticipation that he will come. That's something which Jews have never given up on. For almost 2,000 years, that has been the consistent, universal belief of the Jewish people that a Mashiach will come, and we have to have it. It has to be real to us, real as a real possibility that it could happen in the next minute, and we should be able to be mispalel that it should happen, and we should be zeicher to see it.
Okay.